Thank you for joining. Um, this is a very complicated story right now. Lots of reporting from New York Times, from Politico, my reporting about where things stand. And there's a lot of people who are well positioned, senior congressional officials, senior people in the Biden campaign, who at this hour are saying, regardless of what happens in the press conference, they don't see it's tenable for Joe Biden to go forward. Now, that's different than saying they are going to urge him to not run. That's different from saying they think he's convinced he can't go forward. But there are some people now saying that he is going to be told he can't win, and they believe he will reach the conclusion that he can't go forward. And there are even people saying that's going to happen very soon. Now, I don't think that's true based on what conversations I've had. And again, Joe Biden woke up this morning, and by 8:30, he had an ABC poll, a Washington Post poll showing him even with Donald Trump. And by 8:30, he had the best inflation report he'd gotten since he became president. So it's difficult to understand why so much is happening right now. Press conference at 6:30, scheduled to go to Michigan tomorrow, scheduled to do a Lester Holt interview on Monday. Other interviews are said to be in the works. But I will tell you that there are serious people now around Joe Biden and connected to congressional leadership whose attitude today is very similar to the attitude of 5 news cycles ago, which is this is untenable. And that includes, again, senior people in his campaign. No one has said to me that anyone has made the case to the president. No one has said to me that anyone's going to. Although there are indications that there are congressional leaders who might. The president is most of what the body language is. They think he'll do fine in the press conference. Of course, we'll watch and see that together in just a little bit. The meeting with the senators and the senior campaign staff, by every account I've been given, including from 2 senators who were in the meeting, did not go well. The reality is that the skeptics on Capitol Hill and in the donor class are not interested in private polling that suggests a narrow path to an electoral college victory. What senators are saying is they can't explain or defend the president's mental state, and they can't explain their previous failure to bring this up as an issue, either publicly or privately, and that they consider that to be an untenable position for 120 days of a campaign. I have swung wildly during the course of the last 2 weeks about whether I think he would be the nominee or not. I have thought mostly that he would be, because he will be the nominee unless he decides not to be. They're his delegates. But I would say right now, those of you, including some of you I see right now, who have told me for quite some time that he could not survive this, it's certainly trending that way. The other trend that has switched a little bit, that was largely trending towards, if not Biden, open convention. Things have trended a little bit back towards the vice president. I still don't know anyone who thinks that Joe Biden thinks that Kamala Harris could beat Donald Trump. But that doesn't mean if he got out, he wouldn't endorse her. And what I've spent a fair amount of time today as the congressional sources and the Biden campaign sources have started to go back to saying that they didn't think he would be the nominee, I spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out who would actually run. And I think there's about a dozen names that have been put out there of people who would run. There's 2 kinds of running. If this is open, and open could mean with Kamala Harris in it or not. One kind of running is you're the chosen candidate of Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, that you're an anointed ticket that's considered the establishment choice. That may not work, but the delegates, remember, are all Biden-Harris delegates, and they would pick the nominee. So one is if that group, or if Nancy Pelosi, maybe Jim Clyburn, if that group decides we're for a ticket, or maybe just we're for a presidential candidate and make him pick their running mate. That's one kind of running. That kind of running comes with a great earned media. It comes with presumably a persuasive argument with the delegates who are Biden-Harris delegates. Presumably it comes with the ability to raise money from their financial circles, maybe help from their veteran campaign advisors. The other kind of running is there isn't that kind of laying on hands, maybe by some of those people, but not in a way that creates a clear favorite. And then the question is, who wants to get in that race? And getting in that race with Kamala Harris in it is different than getting in it without her in it. I think there's a big assumption that these people would all get in, and it would be a challenge to figure out who is allowed to address the convention, who's on a ballot if there is a ballot. I'm not so sure based on the calls I've had today. I think the reality is, and this is something that concerns a lot of senior people in the party, it's easy to say, oh, Gretchen Whitmer. It's easy to say Josh Shapiro. These people have done nothing like run for president. And there's a concern about their ability to handle the scrutiny. And most people in Trump world think it's hilarious that these people think that they can survive the scrutiny that would come. There's no one on the list who strikes fear in the hearts of Mar-a-Lago, which is not to say they take it for granted. But the capacity to launch a campaign and not have your family destroyed is something on the minds of some of the people mentioned all the time. You could say that Gavin Newsom is the obvious choice if what you're looking for is someone who's been at the highest levels. Because if you say Beshear, Cooper, Whitmer, Wes Moore, these people have not played at anything like this level. They've gotten no scrutiny. So you say, well, Gavin Newsom, governor of California, on national media all the time, major league skills. But then I'd urge you, if you think that, to go watch his debate with Ron DeSantis, where he was not that great, in my view. He certainly didn't blow him away. And so the reality is you can play fantasy football and mix and match any two people. And of course, the one that people mix and match the most is Shapiro and Whitmer, because those two states are so critical. But it's having covered a lot of presidential campaigns and observing those people and meeting some of them and knowing some of them, I couldn't tell you that any of them would be stronger than Joe Biden, which is, of course, a lot of what Joe Biden thinks as well. So if Joe Biden withdraws, we'll have to see what Harris does. We'll have to see what these other Democratic elites do. To go back to the first question, we've seen very clear indications, publicly and privately. Pelosi very publicly, Schumer and Jeffries more privately, but clearly in the last 24 hours, all of them have made clear they're not just going to sit back and let Donald Trump run against Joe Biden. His task of proving to people that he should be the nominee who are skeptical is very difficult, because at this point, most of them, from what they say, they can't be satisfied. They don't care how many interviews or town halls he does, although they're skeptically do them. They want medical records and they want sustained performance. And that's not happening. So I understand that there'll be no more medical transparency. There'll be no more, wide open events. So we'll see about the press conference. Last two things I'll say, and then I want to bring in a couple folks. It's still his nomination. And as of this morning, my understanding was he was not thinking about modalities of giving it up. But as people in my life, Democrats and Republicans who've told me for 10 days he's going to not be the nominee, have said it's all gradual until it's sudden. So I'm not telling you he's going to get out at the press conference, but I could also tell you, based on the conversations I've had since about noon, it wouldn't surprise me at this point. I don't think he will, but it wouldn't surprise me. And then finally, I believe, based on best information I have, that there's a good chance that J.D. Vance will be named Trump's running mate on Sunday. There's some Democrats, I don't know why they're saying this, but some Democrats saying that that Biden will get out on Sunday. So if you thought you were going to have a relaxing Sunday, maybe not. Maybe one of the biggest news days we've had in a long, long time. So first, I want to bring in Melissa DeRosa, who worked for Andrew Cuomo, who faced a very similar situation when he was governor. Melissa, could you unmute, please? Come on camera. And Melissa, I want to ask you first about Team Biden, many of whom you know, including Steve Ricchetti. They're dealing with 1,000 fires a day. Which ones do you think are most urgent for them to put out? Is it Nancy Pelosi? Is it senators? Is it the donors? Where is the urgency to try to save themselves long enough to get the nomination?
Okay, so a couple of thoughts on this. Having personally lived through something like this is what I will say. Nobody has any idea what's going on behind the scenes. This is all pure speculation. And I think we have seen some leaks from the highest levels, but very few, right? Most of the leaks that we're seeing are coming out of mid-level staff people. It's not coming out of Ron Klain. It's not coming out of Steve Ricchetti. And unless it's coming out of Jill or Joe Biden or their kids or the people who are in the room, everything we're hearing, we should just chalk up to a lot of it's bullshit. And I say this as someone who, in the final days of the Cuomo administration, there were a lot of things that were being written about how we were making decisions, things I was advising the governor to do, how I was feeling, none of which were true. So everything we're seeing in the press about what's happening in Camp Biden, I think we should take with a very big grain of salt.
Let me just say one thing about that. And I can't obviously talk about my sources, but some of the people saying he can't go forward and he shouldn't go forward are not mid-level. Some of them are senior.
Fair enough.
Go ahead.
But at the end of the day, this is going to be Joe Biden's decision. And it's one, by all accounts, he's going to make with Jill Biden and probably nobody else. And you really can't underestimate or overestimate the human element to all of this. There is a certain point where you can't take it anymore. And where you just say, the press is unrelenting. I can't take this from the New York Times anymore. I can't take the leaks anymore. This is hurting me. This is hurting my family. And that could be something for 81-year-old Joe Biden and his family to consider more than anything else, is just the unrelenting, I can't take it anymore. And so if you're advising Joe Biden, who wants to stay in your Steve Ricchetti or Ron Klain or Anita, you're saying we just have to get, not just have to, but we have to get to the Republican convention, because then we'll be able to take a breath. Because all of the attention will come away from us, presumably, and go on to Donald Trump and the Republicans for the next 4 days. So it's survive and sort of, outdo the very low expectations of this press conference, which I think we all know is going to be brutal. I imagine this press corps who all feels very stupid and who all feels like they've got something to explain to the American public or their boss for why they didn't get this story sooner. And if the press conference from the other day with my friend, Corinne Jean-Pierre, is any indication, you're going to have a rabid press conference. He's got to get over that. He has to survive it. He's got to do a little bit better than expected. And then he's just got to get to Monday. If I were advising him to stay in, that's what I'd be telling him to keep him going. You just have to get through this press conference. You've got to get through Monday. And then the clock will naturally eat up 4 days. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Melissa, if you were working for him and Nancy Pelosi wanted to come see him, what would you do?
I would grant the meeting, because you can't not grant the meeting to Nancy Pelosi. But I would say to Nancy Pelosi, it's my election. I'm not getting out. If she says to him, I'm going to have to go out and publicly say, you have to step aside, then I would be lining up members of the Congressional Black Caucus to get my back and others to try to get my back. I mean, there's strategic things you can do, but I don't think he can avoid a sit down with Nancy Pelosi or a conversation with Nancy Pelosi. Do you?
You probably not. Could say he's busy. You pointed out yesterday that the lieutenant governor of New York, in defiance of the governor and in contradiction to his previous position, went from "I'm for Biden" to saying Biden should step down. It seems to me that one thing that would be very damaging to him, although it doesn't mean he has to get out, but very damaging to him, is if AOC or Mark Kelly or someone who's come out for him come against him. These people have only so many hours in the day. Do they need to keep checking with people like that in a situation like this, or they just have to hope that those people don't go soft?
I mean, look, they've got a good extensive operation. Yeah, you should be calling those people regularly and making sure they're on the reservation. But I think they're making a calculus more or less that they're losing all of those people, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I think when you lose the New York Times editorial board, when you think that the former president of the United States, who you served in office with for 8 years is openly telling people, fine, if you want to go out against him, you feel like you're now a renegade and your job is to go and get the Joe Scarboroughs and Mika Brzezinskis and to get some people from the Congressional Caucus and to get people to come out and say, donors and celebrities and elites are not going to chase him off the stage. And so I think they're sort of moving into a different game where they're almost viewing those people as their foils in a way to try to stay in it and galvanize real people support. And to your point, they woke up this morning to a poll, a national poll. Now, look, I take the national polls with a grain of salt because we all know there's 6 states that matter and the national polls are helpful directionally, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It matters what's going on in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. But if you're him, you're saying, I've got the people behind me, and you've yet to give me a compelling case for why someone else would do better. And there's the question of the money if it's not Kamala. And we're at this late stage. And oh, by the way, the Republican Party was ready to anoint Ron DeSantis. And then he collapsed on the national stage within 3 weeks. So to say a Gretchen Whitmer or any of these people is sort of nonsensical. So for him, it's just burn down the clock.
Right. Thank you, Melissa. Stay with us. Speaker Gingrich, I'm wondering if you've changed your view about whether Joe Biden is staying or going at this point.
Well, I think he's suffering right now almost a Chinese water torture of a couple of people a day or a movie star or what have you. The underlying reality is if he and Jill and Hunter want to stick it out, they're going to stick it out. I don't see enough pressure building right now. You know, I mean, if he had collapsed in the polls to a point where, say, he was 10 or 12 points behind Trump, you'd have one thing. But he hasn't collapsed that badly. And so I think you can imagine that they're just sitting there thinking, you know, we're going to endure this. You have to ask yourself, how likely is it if Biden is not willing to leave that you could actually get a rebellion among the delegates? And I think it's very, very unlikely. It's very hard to do it. I think he's in more trouble than I would have guessed 3 or 4 days ago, because it's sort of people are gradually getting courage from each other, and you'll see a steady increase, particularly if he has any major mistakes. But he hasn't done badly by the standard we're used to with Joe Biden. He hasn't done badly at NATO, and he's certainly been on the phone, and he's certainly been trying to hold things. And I thought the Black Caucus support was really central to sort of stopping any panic. This is again, I'm a Republican. What do I know?
Yeah.
No,
if you were,
I was going to just say, I agree with the speaker. I mean, I think that those are his delegates. This would require the Democratic Party to be organized if they were going to try to pull off a coup. This would be at the convention, which, by the way, it can't even be at the convention. It would have to be before Ohio because of the quirk in that law, which means before August 7th, right? The party voted to do a remote casting of the delegates, but, you know, in advance of August 7th. So this actually has to be taken care of in the next 28, 29 days. This would require the party to be so organized from the top down. And when you see things like Kathy Hochul losing her own lieutenant governor, and Kathy Hochul is like the chief cheerleader amongst the governors, it gives you very little confidence that there's anyone who is strong enough to be able to pull something like that off, to say nothing of the fact that there's no consensus candidate. So this would have to be Joe Biden turning over the reins. And I think that the only way that happens is there's some disastrous performance tonight, or again, you know, on a human level, that the beating doesn't stop, that people continue to come out, and that he just can't take it anymore.
Yeah, thank you both. Stay with us. David Bonson, unmute, please.
Caught me with the mic down. You hear me, Mark?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I wanted to comment on your, at the beginning, I kind of am confused about this Washington Post poll, where the a close poll in the general popular vote could be possibly taken seriously relative to the deterioration in all the battleground polls, where we see Virginia and to some degree New York allegedly becoming competitive at the same time that Wisconsin, especially Pennsylvania, effectively Nevada, Arizona, Georgia are off the board. Where would a popular vote poll be relevant to the Biden calculus other than just simply mining for data that helps justify a suicide mission. It just strikes me as very contradictory to the fundamentals of the
Right.
battleground poll and the electoral picture that you've highlighted well before the debate was a 270 plan or bust. And
Yeah.
even that now looks to be so strenuous. And then if there's a second, I'd like to make a comment on the inflation data too, but don't want to hog the mic, so I'll let you.
No, go ahead and do that, and then we'll talk about the polling question.
It's kind of ironic because I, as a lifetime conservative dedicated to finance and economics, have taken a lot of flack from my friends on the right because I've repeatedly maintained that the inflation was not actually entirely President Biden's fault, and no Republican, let alone supply sider, could take seriously that it was. It's fair game politically, and there was no possible way this ever was not going to get stuck to the Biden administration. But for a couple of years now, I've repeatedly made the point that there was certain components of supply conditions in driving the inflation numbers higher. And yet at the same time, politically, this numbers reading doesn't change a thing about what is the only part of the inflation narrative that matters. Inflation is always and forever a cumulative deal, and year over year disinflation. We've been in essentially core goods deflation for some time. It just doesn't matter politically. There's only one thing that the middle class voters know, which is that their grocery bills are way higher. And first class airfare is a lot lower year over year. I do not think that will be moving the middle class knob in the blue wall states. I'll go back to mute.
Right. Okay, David, thank you. So those questions I think can kind of be addressed together from the political point of view. You addressed it from the substantive point of view, from your perspective. I think if you think about both the inflation data and the national poll, they can matter on two levels. One is on the psychology of the president and the anger of the president. Remember, this is a guy who's in private, very angry, big chip on his shoulder, and indignant that people think he should step down. And so just in terms of him saying, I'm even in a national poll, the bottom hasn't fallen out. And I got the inflation's trending the right way. I don't think either of them have anything to do with actual voters, but that's plain in psychology. The second way is as just a talking point to Democrats to try to keep them in line. I think the reality is there's not enough battleground state data for us to have a conclusive view about what impact the debate had on the battleground states. But there's no, even if you take the data that's most negative, that shows the biggest deterioration, people have made up gaps larger than that in presidential campaigns and have won. If you look at the polling, and again, this is my criticism of the polling in 2016, there's some polling with Trump approaching 50, but most of it has him well below 50. Now, the incumbent being below 50 is a bigger problem, but Trump is in some ways a quasi-incumbent and may have his ceiling. So I think he can say this national poll shows, and his people can say this national poll shows the bottom hasn't fallen out. Now, again, the post poll is not in line with most of the others, but Trump's not up 10. And even in our polarized society, I think some people thought Trump could be up 10. If you believe the ABC poll and use it as a talking point with Democrats who are wobbly, you say the bottom hasn't fallen out nationally. We're not so far behind that we can't make up the battleground state problems. And again, we all know he's weaker in the battleground states than he is nationally for all the obvious reasons and some demographic reasons. The problem for him in making that argument, his people making that argument, is, as we've talked about here, he was behind pretty badly with one narrow path to 270 before the debate. And they're worried that he's going to make another mistake and that it doesn't matter where he is and that Trump's had a small, durable lead the whole time. So I think that's the utility of it. It's not because it's a national election, and it's not because all the polls show him even, but just in his mind and as a talking point, it's a pretty valuable thing. And the timing of it, it's obviously significant. Thank you, David. John Sununu.
Hey, just a couple of observations. First, there are really two different arguments.
Did we lose John
One
Sununu?
is that he's not. What's that?
I thought
Can you
we
hear
lost
me?
you. Go ahead. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
One argument is that he's not fit to run. And the debate showed his lack of fitness and obviously set off this process. But the other line of argument is that he can't win. I mean, it flows from his lack of fitness.
Yeah.
But it's a mistake to get bogged down in the discussion of whether he can or can't win, when in fact he's not fit to run. And most of the people on the Democratic side and members of Congress that have expressed concern about his ability to win are really just being polite, because they recognize he is not fit
Yeah.
to run the campaign. So I just
Yeah,
want to point out that these are
it's a brilliant point. Brilliant.
They're different things, and that's why this is going to continue. I mean, it's probably a little bit behind where I thought it would be. You know, I thought it, but I still think by Friday, by the end of the day tomorrow or Saturday, everyone will know he has to get out. His inner circle is going to understand that. The leadership will have formulated in their own minds a mechanism for communicating the current state of their caucus and the Senate or in the House. A few more House members are going to come out and say that he shouldn't run. But at that point, it also becomes a process problem and challenge, because if I were his inner circle, Jill Biden or President Biden, you cannot and you should not announce that he isn't going to run until you know what process you are going to endorse.
Right.
And so there has to be consensus around the process. And it's possible. I mean, this is threading a lot of needles, I understand. This is where President Obama can and probably would have a very big role, is in sort of trying to identify the process and communicate the process and endorse the process. Obviously, the leadership, Nancy Pelosi and Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, they'll all have to get on the same page. So even if we get to a point in the next 72 hours where it's clear that he's going to step down, he still isn't necessarily going to make any announcement until they have consensus on that process. And then, you know, with regard to who it is, I do think it's Harris. You went through sort of the trade-offs and the challenges for any other candidate. One way to look at it is, who could possibly benefit politically by taking on this challenge? And if you're Christian Whitmer or Shapiro, there's a big risk in taking this on, not because you're going to get scrutinized, but because if you get creamed, it could be the end of your political career. There's much more political upside in them for being the trooper that joins the ticket and campaigns hard, even on a losing cause.
Right.
And so I don't think there are going to be many people who have any interest in taking on Harris. And you know, I think she obviously checks the right boxes. And I think at this point, it's hard to make an argument that one of these candidates polls any better than the other.
Right. So let me address the thing you just said about the vice president and then go back to the question of the president acuity. Three people who will have a pretty significant say if there is a process designed and a question of whether to coalesce around the vice president: the president, Speaker Pelosi, and Jim Clyburn, despite what he says publicly. I have strong reason to believe that they have some doubts about her ability to win a general election and be a good president. So that has propelled a little bit of this move towards wanting a brokered convention. I don't know that we can say for sure that everything Clooney wrote was Obama endorsed, but in Obama world, there's also skepticism that it makes sense to anoint her, because despite some polls showing her doing okay, there's a strong belief that she wouldn't win. And if she did win, that she wouldn't do a good job. That's not my position. That's the position of these very important and influential
Understood.
people.
And that's all the more reason that there has to be this sort of window where even if inside the White House or in Obama world, they know that he's not going to stand for re-election, they have to have defined a process and perhaps even thought about one or two candidates that they absolutely want to be part of that process.
Right. I thought you said though that she was the only logical choice. Did I misunderstand?
I think she's the most logical choice. I mean, they're going to have to
and
pull
what I'm saying is
they have to pull a rabbit out of their hat.
For at least three of the people who'd be at the table, she's not a logical choice, and they think that that's doable. Whether you get her to stand down or you just say, "Hey, we shouldn't be picking a winner. We should have an open process." Regarding the president, and I think this is a little opaque, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. And I think some of the public appearances make this clear. Part of the difficulty of getting him to say you can't win is he can wave the ABC poll around. More difficult than convincing him he can't win is convincing him he's not mentally competent to be president, because he's not 24/7 the way he was in Atlanta. If you were with him right now, I believe he could talk to you about Germany's contribution to NATO perfectly fine. And so you're asking a man who feels like he has more good moments than he does, who has created a propaganda array around him that says, I had one bad night, which we know isn't true, but which he thinks, I believe, thinks is more true than not. Convincing him you can't be president. And of course, lots of people will say if he can't run for president, he can't continue to be president. I'm not sure that's true, but as a political matter, but to convince him you've lost it. You are no longer competent to run this campaign and to serve as president. I think that's going to be a hard thing to get him to. A very hard thing to get him to. And it's certainly a hard thing to get him to quickly. And remember, he's a horrible decision maker. Horrible. He doesn't make easy decisions well. And this is the hardest political decision of his life. So this notion that he's going to decide by Sunday, again, I don't see it. And as you suggested, he can't decide it until and make it public until he's decided who's going to be at the table to decide what happens if he steps down. And that's a hard thing to decide.
I think it's just one person's opinion, but I think the people around him will have decided what the path has to be by Sunday. I don't think they'll announce it until they're coalesced around a process. And again, back to Harris, if Harris runs, if she wants to pursue it and refuses to step down, I think she ends up being the nominee because of the political costs associated with challenging her. If she is convinced not to pursue it, and it's in that sense an open convention, then that's a different scenario. But a lot will depend on her temperament and the decision she makes in pursuing this.
And I'll just say, not to keep fighting with you about it, not that we're fighting, but to go back and forth too much, and then Melissa, and then John Podhoretz. I think this is headed right now, and again, it's very amorphous and vague, but I think it's headed towards an open process. If he does step down, an open process where she would have a natural advantage, but not be endorsed or boosted. And I do think she'd get at least one serious challenge under that circumstance, because you've got too many people at the table who don't think she can win. You know?
No, I think that's reasonable. I mean, it's hard to imagine nobody steps up and nobody throws the hat in the ring. That's for sure.
Yeah. Melissa.
No, I just wanted to make a point on the first point from the last conversation, which was this idea that there are members of Congress who are being polite and saying he can't win when really they think he isn't competent enough to continue to lead. And all I would say to that is, this is another place where we in the Democratic Party have shot ourselves in the foot, because if they came out within 24 hours of the debate and took that position when everyone was sort of shell-shocked in that moment when the New York Times came out, then I think it would have appeared to be a very principled stance about being concerned for the direction, the future of the party. But by holding back and having people as senior as someone like Jerry Nadler come out and say, I don't think that he can lead, I'm concerned about his ability to move forward, but then within 24 hours have that whiplash of saying, well, he's the nominee, so it is what it is, we're all on the same side. I think they also handed the president the ability to say, this is politics. These are people who are making decisions based on their own personal politics. And I'm making decisions for the country. And I'm the only one who's ever beat Trump, and I can do it again. So I think that by waiting this long period of time, and what I think as someone who's been a lifelong card-carrying member of the party and been a part of many campaigns, is that these people were willing to be on board so long as their own personal polling came back and looked okay. But that's not what happened this week. So I think that them standing back and doing what they did did also gave Joe Biden the running room to create a narrative that this is about politics and this is the elites trying to push him out and he's for the people and not the politicians.
Thank you. I want to see some more hands up. We've got a couple up that we're going to go to, but I want to see more hands up of people who are part of the two-way community, not necessarily award-winning podcasters like John Podhoretz or news-breaking reporters like Mayhope Fowler. So John Podhoretz, but again, I'd love to see some more hands up to call on John.
I'm really grateful that Melissa DeRosa was on this call because I was thinking about the Andrew Cuomo example and the drumbeat and the pressure that was on him that was so intense that, as you say, it sort of confirms my sense that Cuomo decided he just could not take it any longer. And I don't think we think that Biden is going through what we're going through with Biden. He is not on Twitter. He is not reading stuff that is not put right in front of him. He is not living in this fishbowl with us. That is my guess, is that, first of all, he's at NATO right now, or dealing with the NATO stuff. He's isolated. He's got his family surrounding him. He is seeing what they show him, and he is hearing what they tell him, and he is not feeling what Andrew Cuomo felt. And my guess is that he's still where he was on Monday. We think he shouldn't be. We think that everybody is rattled by George Clooney. We think that it matters that, who is it who said that John Hickenlooper said 9 out of 10 of his phone calls is coming in saying Biden should go. Biden doesn't necessarily hear that. And so I don't know that he is experiencing the things that we're experiencing. And I think we need to take account of that fact. It is very easy for the president not to participate in the, in the unbelievably intense pressure that we're all experiencing for him in some weird way.
Yeah, John, great point. Although I know he knows some of it, and just by watching Morning Joe, he's going to see some support, but he's heard some pretty discordant voices there as well. John, thank you. Tom Roper.
And the other point I would
Melissa,
make,
go ahead.
sorry, the other point that I would make as someone who lived through this was, it was that personal pressure and the attacks against me and the attacks against people like his brother that contributed to, him wanting to make it stop because he didn't want to put everyone around him through it. But also in our case, we were under the threat of impeachment. And there you had a bunch of politicians who could never beat Andrew Cuomo at the ballot box, do what they wanted to do, which was sort of push him out and get him out of power so that they could have power. In this instance, Joe Biden doesn't have that. I mean, short of them pulling off a coup at the convention or in advance of the convention, Joe Biden doesn't have that. So the politicians can come out and make his life miserable and write the campaign ads for Donald Trump. But they don't have the ability to do what we were under in the same situation, which is remove forcefully from office. So that also is a difference here.
Great point. Tom Roper.
Thanks, Mark. I just want to say how much I've enjoyed this group, and there are a lot of smart people on here, and I certainly learned a lot. And
not over yet, Tom. There's more to learn.
Well, what I want to say is, I've heard a lot about, what Joe Biden's going to do, and wouldn't it be interesting to have an open convention, and wouldn't that be exciting? Well, my opinion is if Biden gets out, then what you have is the fog of war. Because I think that this could go sideways in a lot of ways that nobody has even considered yet, right? This has never happened before. I think it can go sideways in a lot of ways. I would love to see this group game that out. In other words, what are all the ways it could go sideways that we haven't really discussed yet? And if you're on the DNC, I think you want to know the ways it can go sideways and try to avoid that. That's my comment. I think this group is smart enough to come up with some really interesting ways that it could go wrong, just as an exercise.
Tom, are you a Democrat?
I was a Republican for 30 years until 2016.
Yeah, and so who if it's Biden Trump, who will you vote for?
Biden.
Biden. What state do you live in?
Was in Pennsylvania for many years, now in Virginia.
So you moved from one battleground state to another.
That's right.
Just kidding. All right. So we've talked a little bit about the question of the chaos and what could go wrong. And James Carville and others have painted this portrait of American Idol, great attention and focus and all these stars. I mean, no disrespect to the field, the potential field. But as I've already said, they've not been scrutinized. Some of them are not great speakers. In fact, I wouldn't say any of them are, in the Clinton-Obama category. And they don't have teams and operations, and the press interest would be huge. They'd be overwhelmed. So I think one big thing that could go wrong, and then I'll turn to Melissa for a list. One big thing to go wrong is people could be very underwhelmed by this field when they start to go on TV and when the scrutiny comes. And so they may be thinking they're going to go on a TV show or come on two-way and ask questions about how awesome they are to run against Donald Trump. And they may be asked about during COVID when they left their state to go visit their mother in Florida, or when they went to the French Laundry. So underwhelming and overwhelmed field, I would say, is one thing that could go wrong. Melissa.
No, I mean, look, it's exactly that. These people are untested. These people have not been vetted. Gavin Newsom sounds like a great idea, and I have a lot of respect for Gavin and his team, but do we all want to litigate the state of San Francisco and the homeless encampments in San Francisco and on, and say that that's what America is going to be? Gretchen Whitmer, I think she delivers a great speech. I personally am a fan of hers. But when she's on the national stage, is she going to be Katie Britt? You just don't know. I mean, there was like a moment there when we all believed Katie Britt was going to be vice president to Donald Trump. She gave one response to the State of the Union, and we'll never hear from her again. And so this is why you need a robust primary process to vet people, to see what attacks actually stick and take your numbers down, because, some of these things, maybe the San Francisco thing wouldn't be a big deal, but we don't know. And the runway is so short. It's like, what are you going to take a chance on? And people like Josh Shapiro, Wes Moore, these are people who just got to their jobs. And so I think that going with someone untested and unknown could end up being a complete and total nightmare. And while I understand all the obvious drawbacks with Kamala and the fact that she's been historically unpopular, I think there is a question around whether or not that $232 million could be transferred. So there's that very practical issue. There is sidestepping the first ever Black female vice presidential nominee for someone who isn't at the national level, who presumably Joe Biden chose because he believed that if he had to step aside, she could take the reins, and she was elected before. And then are you going to fracture an already fractured party and potentially piss off Black voters or female voters? And so, I just think we're in a no-win situation. And regardless of what happens, we're all going to look back and say, woulda, shoulda, coulda.
Yeah. Tom, I'll give you three more, and then Jill Abramson will come in. And again, I'd love to see more hands from people who are part of the two-way community who aren't necessarily people who run the New York Times. One thing that could go wrong if Kamala Harris does run and she's kind of the de facto nominee, she could screw it up in 2 weeks, right? She could just do horribly. She could have her worst possible moments, and Trump could go up 7, and the party would then be like, oh my goodness, what did we do? This could happen before the convention, right? What did we do? We put in someone who's got a horrible record of management, a horrible record of public speaking. And so that could happen. Another thing that could happen, to go back to what Senator Sununu said, is she could be in a contested fight at an open convention, and it could rip the party apart because a bunch of white men run against her. And lastly, planning the convention, even for the most organized campaigns I've ever covered, even incumbent presidents, it's chaotic. Who speaks when, who does what interviews on TV, who's in charge of the podium. That's really hard. And in this case, you've got a national chairman who's just a appendage of the White House. So who's going to make the decisions? And what happens when they start dropping oppo on each other? People have proposed an open convention where there's no negativity. I mean, really, if it's going to be a fight for the nomination, you might see a little bit of negativity. And so managing the convention so it's 4 days, great. I don't know, Steven Spielberg's been involved in the convention. I don't know if he'd continue to manage it, but that's just a recipe. As Bill Clinton said, it's Democratic Party can't organize a one-car parade. And now you'd be asking them to organize this very complicated thing on pretty short notice. Jill Abramson, unmute, please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. We have talked about, I think a lot of us feel this is a dangerous situation for the country because the president is not fit to carry out his duties, the responsibilities of the office. And I'm so disgusted with the press. I mean, most of you know I've been speaking out on that in various places, but watching the news conference, yeah, it was ugly, was difficult, but the press should, in one voice, demand, okay, Biden's going to say no, but make a clear demand for transparency about his health records. And they should be demanding to interview his doctor. And they should not stop asking for that. And it's unbelievable to me that there isn't a strong cry. We are the watchdogs for the public. Like, where the F are we? The most important, we're dealing on this call. Like, look, this is a great call. I love doing it, but we're dealing in the realm of politics and conjecture. I'm sorry. My business is finding out the facts. And I want his health records. I want his doctor to be held accountable. I want Joe Biden to have to submit to an interview with a reputable medical journalist. Stat News has a team of them, including Larry Altman, who, served for, at the Times for so many years as the watchdog for the public on the health of the presidential candidates. This is just an abdication of our jobs. And the fact that the White House press corps didn't just walk out of that press conference amazes me and disgusts me.
Yeah. Jill, I couldn't agree with you more. But all I'll say is, I've written about this. Joe Biden was showing signs of this in 2017. I watched a 20-minute video today.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
Of clips from Joe Biden in the 2020 campaign, most of which he appears more out of it than he did on the stage in Atlanta. And I am appalled, and have been since 2017 or 2019, that the president of the United States addresses a dead congresswoman, and there's a few questions at the briefing. This was a national security emergency.
I agree.
And the amount of scrutiny of Donald Trump compared to the amount of scrutiny of the incumbent is, I've said this a few times lately, I think it's a more serious failure than WMD. It's a more serious failure than Russia. It may be the most serious failure.
I'm your ally in this.
And it is a joke to watch the briefing this week, to watch these reporters suddenly concerned about this. We're going to do a whole two-way about this. We might do a month's worth, but I couldn't agree with you more, Joe. And all I'd say is, this is not a new problem. This is an old problem. And the White House intimidated and threatened reporters more than the Trump administration ever did. And it is an outrage how little that was written about and how intimidated they were. And I would talk to White House reporters and they would say, oh yeah, the president's completely out of it. Nothing. Thank you, Jill. Jim Kennedy, who's worked for Democratic presidents and has worked for Chris Dodd too, who could be changing history, but apparently, according to Doug Sosnick the other day, is choosing not to. Jim.
How you doing? I was with Joe Lieberman, close enough.
Sorry. You never worked for Chris Dodd?
I didn't. I tried to, but Rosa.
I thought you did.
Didn't give me the
All right.
I agree. I agree with a lot of what Jill Abramson said. And when I was with Bill Clinton after the White House, he had a serious heart problem and he had to be rushed to surgery. And we decided to organize a news conference the same day with the doctors who did the surgery. And so we had a news conference on the hospital grounds, and it was live on cable TV. And they spent nearly a half hour giving explicit detail about what he went through. And we did that as sort of a way to educate the public about heart disease. And I thought that was a good thing to do. And I think it would be a good thing to do now, although I'm not sure it's actually going to happen. Although perhaps it's an exit strategy if he gets a private assessment and then decides to leave. And that way he's basically following doctor's orders and not being pushed out by pundits. One other point I would make is I was in that Clinton war room, a mid-level person in the Clinton war room in '98. And there was a crisis moment in, you remember when he gave a speech to the nation after his grand jury testimony, and there was a bad reaction to it because he was very defiant kind of speech. And so we had a bit of a moment of crisis, and Steve Ricchetti was in the room with us, and he was the liaison with the Senate. And I remember he came back one day and he said, one of the senators said, the president's got like 72 hours to save his presidency. I think it might have been Joe Biden who gave that message. And then we ultimately organized sort of a intervention with the president to convince him to do another apology, which he did afterwards. And that helped sort of calm the storm at that moment. So sometimes a kind of intervention becomes necessary at that level.
Jim, do you think Joe Biden will be the nominee?
No.
No.
I don't think it's sustainable. I think, unlike the Bill Clinton situation, he at least had the support. He was doing his job well, and the American people gave him strong support during that time, and that helped him survive. But those facts aren't evident here.
Thank you, Jim. So, not all members of the House who come out for Joe Lieberman not to run, for Joe Biden not to run, are created equal. Greg Stanton, congressman from the battleground state of Arizona, who says on his tweet announcing his call for President Biden not to run, he says, "I'm one of President Biden's earliest supporters in 2020, and I'm proud of the progress we've made in Arizona. However, the stakes in the election could not be higher for our country's sake. It's time for the president to pass the torch to a new generation of leaders." So, a couple hours before the press conference, he is coming out thusly. All right, let's go to Rick Hall, please.
Oh, thank you, Mark. I hope this is on point. I was thinking about this week with all the significant things that have happened in the last 4 days. I thought maybe the most was when George Stephanopoulos asked Joe Biden how he would feel in January if he had lost the election. And he said, as long as I gave it my all, I'd feel fine. And I thought that is the exact wrong answer if you really do believe that Donald Trump is an existential threat. And I just thought, wow, is this all just BS? And it's like a lot of things, it catches on and everybody starts saying it. I wish somebody would ask them how.
Yeah. Who are you voting for in the election?
Well, I live in South Carolina, so I haven't voted for Trump yet, but it doesn't matter. So I voted for Biden in 2020. I thought he was going to do what he said he was going to do, and he didn't. So honestly, I'll probably write in John Kasich again.
Okay, thank you, Rick. I want to talk about what's coming up on two-way, and then a little bit more previewing tonight. On Monday, we're debuting a new program that'll be a daily program. Some of you have said you love two-way, but you'd like more regular schedule, and that's our aspiration as we ramp up here. So Monday morning, we're previewing a new program called The Morning Meeting, 8:30 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. And the morning meeting is modeled on something that I've been lucky enough to hear for most of my career, which is the network news divisions do a morning call where they talk about what's on the day book, what's happening up that day in the news, and then they kind of kick it around. It'll be this format, so you get a chance to ask questions. But the morning meeting, Sean Spicer, Tim Hogan, who's a Democratic strategist who worked for Hillary Clinton, who worked for Amy Klobuchar, the three of us will be the host. We'll have guests on occasion. But the real opportunity there is for you all to start your day with a chance to hear what's happening. We'll wake up and we'll figure out what's going on for you. We'll tell you what the president's doing, the vice president, Donald Trump, what other things are occurring that day. And then again, we'll talk to you about what we think is going to dominate the day. What are the narratives? What are the new developments that are likely to occur? We'll take your questions. And then you'll be able to watch it on demand afterwards. We'll turn it around real quick, so you'll be able to watch it and anytime during the day. And then again, Monday through Friday, 8:30 Eastern, 25 minutes. So not a long call, but just long enough, hopefully, that whether you've got just an interest because you're interested in politics and government, or whether you've got professional need to know what's going to happen, hopefully you'll have an opportunity to join us, ask some questions, and start your day informed the two-way way, right? There's lots of things we all read in the morning, newsletters and newspapers and social media. But this is, we think, a great use of two-way, an opportunity to be a part of a conversation, part of a community that's starting the day together to learn what's going on. So I'd love to bring in Sean and Tim, surprise guest cameos, ask them to unmute and just talk a little bit about why it is you guys are excited about this, your best rah-rah way. Sean is unmuted, so go first, and then Tim. Sean, go ahead. Here we go. Sean, go ahead and unmute, or Tim, either one of you go first.
You hear me now?
Yes, sir. There you are.
All right.
Go ahead, Sean.
I would just, for me, most of my career has been on the receiving end of the morning meeting, right? So reporters have these calls at all the networks to talk about what stories and issues are driving the day. And then I dealt with it, taking those incoming calls. And so I think it's kind of an interesting dynamic between the three of us that are going to be able to provide some insight every morning as to what stories are actually going to have an impact, how people will react to them, whether or not it'll penetrate. And as Mark said, the format is quick, fast, and engaging. So I think we're looking forward to getting people engaged in this.
Tim Hogan.
Yeah.
Tell everybody why you're fired up and ready to go to spar with Sean on the day book.
Yeah, very exciting to be able to take shots at Sean. No, I think the information ecosystem that we live in now, there's no one defining thing in the morning that you can take as an input and say, this is what's going to be driving the day. If you're just opening your inbox or you're opening your browser or you're scrolling on Twitter or you're on social, you're going to get bombarded with a whole bunch of information. And I think what I'm excited to do is to join the two of you in conversation and this community to talk about what from that mess of information, can we try to distill about narratives that are going to drive the day, and what should you really be watching and looking for to understand what's happening in the news, but also behind the news, and the decisions that people are making to elevate things as part of a conversation or try to bat down other things and deal with other issues. So I'm excited to join both you and Sean on this.
Great. Thank you, guys. Looking forward to it. Again, you'll be able to watch it on YouTube. You'll be able to join the two-way community to be able to ask questions. I know a lot of people are watching on YouTube right now, more than are watching here in the two-way. So thank you for watching this on YouTube. And again, you'll be able to watch it live, be able to join and ask questions, but also you'll be able to watch it on a video on demand later. And there'll be clips sent around as well for the great stuff. And we'll have guests, as I said. And next week, of course, we're starting when the convention is beginning, but we'll also be presumably in the middle, or either in the middle of the Biden story, or perhaps we'll be in the middle of a story about the search for a Democratic nominee. Tonight at 9:00 Eastern, we'll be back here. You've got the link for watching it on YouTube or watching it as part of the two-way community to talk about how the president did in the press conference and whatever the latest reporting is. I suspect we're going to see more people in the aftermath of the press conference, no matter how he does, come out and say that he should resign. We've already seen a few more just while we've been on here, and I suspect we're going to see more. So we'll talk about that and where things stand, and then at the end, maybe we'll see you before Monday morning, but we will see you Monday morning. Grateful to you all for making time. Grateful to Sean and Tim for joining, and for Jill and Senator Sununu, Speaker Gingrich, and very much Melissa DeRosa joining us with her expertise about what happens when the pressure is unrelenting. And as I said, we'll see you on Monday. Thanks, everybody. And tonight at 9.